Welcome into another edition of the FutureSox RoundUp. My name is Elijah Evans, and I'm joined by my co-host Jeff Cohen, as well as our guest today, Dan Helotie of the Kannapolis Cannonballers, the broadcaster for the Single A White Sox affiliate. Super excited to have Dan on today. We're going to do a bunch of guests throughout the next few months of the offseason here. It gets a little boring for you guys just to hear me and Jeff talk every week, so we figured we would bring on some people that watch a lot of White Sox prospects all the time. Dan is someone who watched every single Kannapolis Cannonballers game this season. They on their run to the Carolina League Championship, made it all the way to the championship through the playoffs this season. Super exciting year in Kannapolis, one of the best in recent years for sure. So we're honored and excited to have Dan join us and just hang out and talk about the Cannonballers a little bit. So how you doing, Dan? Welcome.
Man, it's awesome to be here, and it's awesome to get talking again about some baseball because man, we've been about a month since the season's been done, and already missing it more than ever. And how do you follow up a season like that? It's just been a whirlwind, and it's been a lot of fun to kind of go back and look at the scorebook again and be like, yeah, that game was awesome, and that those were memories made. And I mean, what a season! Just came up, the one game short up in Fredericksburg, but so many great things, so many great memories of Kannapolis' 30th season of baseball, and here's to a great couple more, and we'll keep rocking and rolling here. But yeah, super excited to be here and talk some Kannapolis baseball.
For sure. So we'll start here. What was you hinted at it there, like obviously run to the championship, incredible playoff run, right? This was a team that had, as Single A normally is, right, a ton of transition throughout the season with the roster, guys coming in, guys coming out, multiple different draft class guys coming through basically throughout the year. What was the feeling like heading into the playoffs for the guys in Kanny? And then how did that kind of change as they started to win some games and then to eventually make the championship?
Yeah, it was kind of funny because as you talked about, Elijah, the guys that clinched this playoff title for us,
Right.
a lot of them moved up to Winston-Salem, and a lot of guys moved up to Birmingham. Just it was a completely different roster. We only had 10 guys at the end of it who were on our opening day roster that played in the Carolina League Championship Series. So a lot of turnover, a lot of fresh faces, and it was just one of those times where it was like a lot of new faces come in and a lot of guys kind of join in the middle of the movie. It's like when you walk into a room and it's midway through a movie on the TV, and you're just like, you got to pick up where it's been left off. And these guys really did a good job of that. They picked up the storyline quickly that, hey, this is a team that it's a special season in Kannapolis, and these fans here deserve it more than ever. And man, they bought in, and they bought in early. They became a unit really quickly. One of the things that really meshed that first half team that got them the championship run and the clinch of the playoffs was chemistry. It was a very strong team chemistry-wise, and I think you saw the team gel a little more with this new squad later in the year. And as the season kind of progressed, about 3 weeks before the end of the regular season, we really started to see, okay, these guys are a unit. They're going to work together. They're going to play hard and play for each other, not play for themselves. And I think that just it propelled them all the way to the Carolina League Championship, as we saw.
It was fascinating to watch the playoff run because, as you said, a lot of new faces. Almost the entire pitching staff, everyone in the rotation except for Jake Peppers was in Winston-Salem. So you had a whole new rotation. And to be honest, you didn't really have a lot of guys with experience, and Pat had to kind of patchwork the rotation. But we got to see Aaron Combs and some other guys step up, and it was just a fascinating run.
Yeah, and I think that later in the year you had that spark of those guys joining the team that already had been in high leverage scenarios, had already been in these crazy situations. You talk about Aaron Combs, the guy comes from Tennessee who, they clinched the College World Series, and he was the guy that got the save and got the last out. He's been in those high leverage scenarios. He's been in those important spots. And to have a guy like that in the playoffs was huge. Having the leadership of a guy like Jake Peppers, who's been there all year, had an up and down season, but was able to stick it out and put together one of his best starts of the year in that Game 3 against Charleston. I mean, just absolutely blew us away. That was a fantastic showing. And you had some other guys that maybe they weren't all the way there yet, like a Mason Moore, a Nick Pinto, but they certainly came in and they got the job done. Just ran into some really good teams and some really good bats. The Carolina League was no joke this year. It was a very competitive league. There really wasn't a clear favorite all year. It kind of swayed from us to Charleston to Fredericksburg at the end. It really just, it kind of was a variety of good talent in the league. and something like that. Just it was fun to watch all year.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk a little bit about that Charleston team specifically, because we were talking about this on another pod. The Rays organization is just like the pinnacle of just determined, hard-nosed, really competitive minor league teams every single year. Charleston is one example of it, but every single level of the Rays organization is always just incredibly competitive. So, and we saw that series get a little chippy at times. I think that team, when me and Jeff were there in person in August, even watching Charleston, there was some things here and there. There was some energy for sure. So what was it like playing Charleston, a team that they're familiar with, and also a team that is that competitive and that good every single season?
Yeah, I mean, you going into that series, you kind of see the talent that Charleston has. I mean, the Tampa Bay Rays organization as a whole is just, you talked about it, they're so stacked in the minor leagues. They have all this talent, and they just continue to develop it. It's a really strong org that I have a lot of respect for, just knowing and growing up in Tampa and watching them, all my childhood. But no, like going into that series, we obviously kind of had that inclination that we were the underdogs. Like Kannapolis really felt that underdog kind of vibe about it, especially going down to Charleston for game one. We were like, okay, we got to go into a really tough place and play a really tough team. And Charleston did just that. I mean, they threw their best guys out there on the field. Gary Gilhill, game one, was like that, going out there and having to face one of the best pitchers in the league on game one like that. Like, welcome to the playoffs, boys. But, got the job done. It was a gritty series for sure. No team really pulled away at any point. Game one was back and forth. I mean, down in Charleston, that was one of the craziest games I've ever recalled. But game three, as we all saw, I mean, scoreless after 10 innings, and then just in a wild 11th inning of baseball. It was insane. That was by far probably the craziest game I've ever seen, was game three of that first round. And two teams that, they fought hard. It was a good series during the regular season between the two, and the playoffs just kind of carried the rest of the way.
Yeah, that's awesome. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed watching that game. It was great.
I tell you, the game in Charleston was, you're right, they were the heavy underdogs. Everyone in that stadium was, didn't you feel like everyone was shocked that they lost? No one could believe they had lost. And I tell you, I had told Elijah that was the most exciting minor league game I'd ever seen. And it was, up until the clinching game in Kannapolis a couple days later. That was even more dramatic, a shutout through 10 innings. Wow.
You don't see that, especially in the single A level. That's not something you see often. Going back a little bit from playoff time to early in the season, flipping gears here a little bit, the first half of the year, there was a lot of the 2023 draft guys, and there was a lot of guys that were kind of the young pieces that were core guys from the season prior that had remained in Kanny or had just gotten to Kanny a little bit towards the end of last year. Who were some of the guys in the first half of the season that really stood out to you before maybe they were promoted, but made a really strong impression in those first few months when Kanny was able to kind of pull ahead in the standings?
Yeah, I mean, you would be remiss to talk about the first half and the success of that team without bringing up some of those 23 draft guys like a Riku Nishida, a Ryan Galaney. Those two guys, for sure. I mean, we saw what Nishida could do all year in the minor leagues for the White Sox. Just a game changer at the leadoff spot, a guy that has all the speed in the world and just has a knack for playing smart baseball. He's just a smart ball player. And to have a guy at the leadoff spot getting on base as much as he does, setting up a two spot like a Ryan Galaney, who last year looked solid. You saw the tools were there, just was having trouble picking it up, coming from a school like Wofford, where he had an offer to go to a bigger school, to a Power 5 in the college level. Just hadn't figured it out quite yet, but the time that he had extra in spring training this year and everything really helped his development. And by the time he got to us in Kannapolis, he was ready to go, and he showed off. I mean, he looked impressive. He showed up for sure in that first half. So guys like Nishida, Galaney, another guy that looked really solid in the first half is Caden Connor. I mean, just kind of a guy that goes out there, plays his style of game, really was kind of versatile in the field, played first base, played a little bit of left field as well, just kind of did whatever Pat Leyland needed him to do, but you knew that Caden Connor was in that third spot. And he wasn't a huge power threat, but a guy that if you had Nishida in the leadoff spot and then Galaney in the two, you're moving guys. Usually in that situation, you'd have Nishida get on base somehow with a walk or an infield single that goes 5 feet in the grass, and then Galaney would smoke a ball in the gap. you'd have runners on the corners or 2 on in scoring position, and in steps Cade and Connor, and he just drives the guys in. So he never was a power guy. I mean, he had a couple home runs here and there, but a guy that had a knack for RBIs, and I think that was the story of the offense in the first half. Wasn't a lot of power, but it was a lot of it was a lot of aptitude for getting on base and then just having the right guy step in and drive him in.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. That's great context there.
Dan, the other big story of the first half, no doubt, was that starting rotation. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that every night we went out there, you never really felt like we were too far behind we never really felt like we were too much of an underdog. Going out there, having guys, even not your superstars, quote unquote, of your rotation. Yeah, the guy that I can think of immediately is Drew McDaniel. Like early on in the year, scouts aren't going to come out and see Drew McDaniel over like an Aldrin Batista or something like that. But Drew McDaniel showed up and tossed like 3 shutout outings in a row and absolutely shut down Carolina League Bats. So a guy that, no, he's not the big prospect name, but he puts together these amazing starts, and he looked sharp as ever. Aldrin Batista, what a guy. I mean, what a performance we saw from him this year, just night in and night out. Looked unreal. He looked, I mean, obviously way past the level of single A, but at times he looked unreal. He was really good. Seth Keener, awesome guy, awesome pitcher. Just always fun to watch him. Really hate that we didn't get Grant Taylor longer. I know that the injury kind of hampered that a little bit, but obviously seeing what Grant's doing in the Arizona Fall League's fun to watch. I mean, what a fun guy to watch. Grant Taylor's probably the most electric arm that I've seen in the Carolina League in my time in the level of baseball. I've been in single A for 5 years now, and Grant Taylor is by far one of the more electric arms I've seen. I mean, him and Noah Schultz, seeing that back-to-back years is just like, my goodness, it's crazy. But yeah, having the amount of arms early on really helped this team, and the amount of experience of some of these arms. I mean, Seth Keener's a college guy from Wake Forest. Lucas Gordon obviously was way advanced for the level of single A by the time he was all said and done. But, another guy that, he's a 6th rounder, but he went to Texas. That's a huge school, and it's a huge program. Having guys with that kind of experience really paid off, and you never really felt too overmatched as a team.
Yeah, that's a great context there for all of those completely. That's exactly right. I mean, I think there was every start you went into, you felt like there was a chance to win, and every pitcher was giving you a chance for sure. And even with the guys that had ups and downs, right? It was quality outings every night. Just giving some numbers to some of the guys you just talked about there, right? Like, I love that you hit on the Cade and Connor point earlier with not necessarily power, but Cade and Connor had 24 doubles this year in addition to 55 RBIs and only 70-something games, right? So it wasn't power, but it was line drives. It was finding the gaps, and it was driving runners in that spot because he had Nishida on base all the time and Glaney on base all the time. And then on the pitching side of things, I couldn't agree more with all the guys you mentioned there, because there's guys that have it's a fun blend, I think, of some experienced guys. There are the college guys that have a lot of time. Lucas Gordon, right, has a ton of innings under his belt in college. And then you've got guys like Batista who are just kind of still learning how to pitch, but have so much excitement behind their stuff. So it was a really fun blend of those pitchers in the first half. And then you get into, some guys start to get moved around and promoted and everything, and it keeps going from there. So let's stay on the pitching side then. As the season progressed, right, obviously Gordon makes 14 starts, Keener makes 14 starts, Taylor only made 4 or 5, I believe, right? All those guys start to rise up. You keep Jake Peppers there throughout the whole year, who, like you said, the stuff with Jake Peppers is great. I'm a huge Jake Peppers fan because I think his stuff is going to play up at any level. I think the command is still kind of getting there for him, but he has stuff that's going to play as he continues to develop, which is really exciting. Who are some of the guys that came into the team from a pitching perspective, later in the season that really made an impact down the stretch as Kanny kind of geared up for the playoffs and got into the postseason run?
Yeah, I mean, one of the guys that immediately sticks out in that kind of scenario for me would be like a Ricardo Brizuela, guy that came in from the Complex League, obviously showed up and showed out in the Complex League, was named an All-Star at the level, and he really kind of came in and provided a lot of a lot of just substance on the mound. And when I say substance, I mean, like, he went out there, didn't always have his best stuff, and he never really lit up the radar gun. He never really was like, oh my gosh, this guy's the nastiest pitcher in the league. He was throwing 88, 89 miles an hour, but he had just kind of that knack for getting through innings and getting guys out on a fly ball, on a lazy little line drive, a ground ball. Like, he had that kind of aptitude to get out of those situations. Another guy would be Tanner McDougal. Obviously, Tanner's been here, done that, kind of in the Carolina League, but kind of that reset that he had late in July, coming back down from Winston-Salem, and where he'd really been struggling, came back down. I think that you saw a lot of weight lifted off of his shoulders, especially late in the year. I mean, we get to the playoffs, and McDougal's a guy that, again, he, like I said, been there, done that in this level of baseball. And by the time we get to the playoffs, he's ready to go. He feels like he can be the most dominant pitcher in the league, and he certainly showed that in Game 2 of the championship up in Fredericksburg. He looked fantastic. So really, Tanner put it all together late in the season. Definitely looked a lot better than he had up in Winston. I think that there were a couple of mechanical tweaks and a couple of just generically like game planning strategies that maybe he wasn't executing as well in Winston. But one of the things that I know for a fact that he was working on a lot was his fastball. He just wanted to keep working that fastball. And when they were in advanced day, the goal was to get your off speed. Well, McDougal's not an off-speed pitcher, and yes, you need off-speed to be a good pitcher, but he's a fastball guy. He wants to throw it by you every single time, and that's something that he was able to do late in the year. A lot of guys that came in from this draft class that just looked really good. I mean, Carlton Perkins was a steady arm throughout the later portions of the year. Mason Moore looked good despite a couple of rough outings. I liked what I saw in Nick Pinto, 19th round pick out of Irvine. He was an anteater out there in California, and every time he stepped to the mound, always was so polished, always looked so sharp, and never really looked like he was overmatched for the level. He always had that kind of, not swagger, but kind of a quiet confidence that, like, hey, I can do this. And he went out there and certainly showed up and showed out.
Yeah, 100%.
And what about some of the draftees on the hitting side? There were a lot of impressive guys there.
Yeah, I mean, a lineup that really went through a lot of change late. I mean, we talked about the change from the first round to later in the year. It was a completely different team. Obviously, getting George Wolko in the middle of the year was awesome, but then you get all these draft guys come in. Sam Antonacci out of Coastal Carolina. What a talent this guy is. I mean, a great infielder, has a great knack for playing the ball well in the infield, but then at the plate, just an on-base machine. I mean, a guy that gets on base and always finds a way to put the ball in play. I think that was one of the things that I was impressed with Antonacci, was he puts the ball in play. He doesn't strike out. He'll find a way to get on base anyway, and then set it up for later in the lineup. And you have guys later in the lineup like an Alec Makarevics, who an experienced college bat who played at high levels like NC State and ECU, that has been in some of those tough spots. And he was a guy that, he'd played in Kannapolis before. He had familiarity there. And you speak to that. I mean, there's peace and familiarity. So coming in and having played in Kannapolis before for a couple of college games was helpful. A guy like TJ McCants, who came up big time late in the year in that Game 3 with the double to send us to the championship round. TJ is a live wire bat that has the ability to put the ball in play with those line drives. I think the power still is there a little bit. I think there's still more power to come with TJ, but certainly an athlete and certainly somebody to keep an eye on. And then I'll touch a little bit on Jackson Appel as well. I think Appel was probably the biggest spark plug addition to this lineup late, not just for his ability at the plate, but behind the dish as a catcher. I think being in those tight spots in the College World Series and coming from a great program in Penn, where he had a great amount of experience, Jackson really came in and joined this team and helped out a lot, not just at the plate with his bat. I mean, he looked solid at the plate, definitely had a couple of opportunities where he had a game-tying 3-run home run against Fredericksburg late in the year, but also just working with these pitchers and saying, hey, maybe try this, and working with a lot of the young guys like, hey, maybe set up a little outside here. And you just saw immediately the weights lifted off the shoulders, especially some of these guys out of the bullpen. And then Jackson was really a valuable piece for this team as well.
Yeah,
he's not a big guy, but I was really impressed with his arm, Dan. He was really impressive back there.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the more high profile pieces of his game. He's got a very strong arm for sure. I think down the stretch was probably our best defensive catcher. That's why Pat Leyland had him in the lineup every time. He gives us the best chance to win behind the dish, and he's not overmatched at the plate where you want to maybe put a Ronnie Hernandez in behind the dish, whereas he had his struggles later in the year with some pass balls and some wild pitches, but obviously Ronnie with the bat. So it was kind of a however you want to play it. kind of scenario for Pat, but Appel gave the team the best chance to win with his defense, and then his bat was still solid, and he showed up in the playoffs as well. So yeah, it was
Yeah.
kind of take and give.
One thing that's interesting to me, and I want to kind of get your take on it too, the lineup switched a lot, right? So it was like when you're trying to get these guys at bats, and that's something that can be really complicated with the minor leagues because you're getting all this new influx of talent, but you're also trying to balance out winning with like you need to get all these guys at bats. You need to swap guys in and out. And I mean, there was times where the lineup was I don't think the lineup was the same almost any day in the regular season for the last 2 weeks of the season. It was basically changing every single day. What do you think that was kind of like for the guys, and how did the players on that team kind of handle the atmosphere of not knowing necessarily for a lot of the guys when they would play day in and day out, kind of day off here? You're playing this day, you're not playing this day, and that kind of energy.
Yeah, there were certainly days where, throughout the week you get 6 different starting lineups. There would be days I'd get 2 or 3 different starting lineups in the same day. It was just one of those things where, it's a simple case of an overflowing amount of talent is number one in Kannapolis. I mean, we had a great amount of guys this year who just were great baseball players, and it's tough to let these guys take a day off sometimes. But really, like, I think in this scenario and what we saw this year with the amount of lineup changes and the amount of variance from Pat Leyland's squad was giving guys opportunities to step in different scenarios. So I think that a guy like a George Wolko example, late in the year, he's batting in the 2 spot. Normally you don't put your power hitter in the 2 spot. You move him down the lineup, maybe a 3 or 4. But I think some of that was, hey, George, maybe don't focus as much on the power. Maybe just focus on hitting the ball hard and using what is some above average speed. I think an underrated part of George Wolko's game, a guy that, you can get on base, hit the ball hard, and he's got some speed for 6'7", 240 to move around the base paths and play that first half style of baseball where you're just going to put guys on base and let guys get the opportunity to drive the run in. So I think that, moving the guys around in the lineup gave a lot of different opportunities for guys to play in different scenarios, because in the minor leagues at this level, that's what you want to do. You want to put these guys in scenarios that they're going to have to face again at some point, and you don't want these guys to step up and be unprepared. So I think that, later in the year, especially knowing that we had the playoff spot locked in, you could play around with it a little bit and not feel like, okay, this isn't a good idea. Maybe this is where we can find out, okay, maybe this guy's really good in the 7 spot because he's got a couple guys ahead of him who are good at getting on base. It's just kind of messing around with it a little bit, and it paid off for sure at times. And I think that, continuing to work around in the lineup certainly helped out late.
Yeah, I like that. I like the way to look at that because I think it's a valuable asset to be able to learn, different positional work for these guys and different places to have to hit in the lineup depending on the situation of the game.
Dan, I wanted to ask you about the middle infielders. Gerald Perez, who came over from the Dodgers mid-year in the Eric Fetty trade, and also Ryan Burroughs, a really highly regarded prospect. And he really struggled for much of the year, but toward the end of the year began to have some really competitive at-bats and then exploded in the playoffs. What do you see in terms of potential from those 2 players?
Yeah, I certainly saw more of Ryan this year just based off like Ryan got to the team in mid-May or so, and then Gerald joined us a little later around the trade deadline time frame. So I'll speak a little more on Ryan just because I think I have a little more of a sample size on Ryan. But really slick middle infielder. Ryan's got a lot of ability with the glove at short and at second. He's a pretty big dude for middle infield. He's a tall guy and he's got a little bit of that physical ability to be up the middle of the field. And at the plate, a guy that just they seemed comfortable. Definitely was working through some different changes. Like he was trying to figure out, especially in the middle of the year, I was talking to him, trying to figure out where to set his hands, where he wanted to be most comfortable and just get that smooth swing off. Because a lot of these guys, I talked about it with George Wolko a little minute ago, it wasn't so much about hitting the home run. It was just making hard contact, making solid contact. I think that was a huge emphasis for this team all year. And I think Ryan was just trying to figure out how to do that later. But I also think in the playoffs, a switch flipped. And the reason for that, I'm going to assign this meaning to it. Big-time players show up in big-time spots. And Ryan's a big-time player. Ryan likes a little bit of flash. He likes a little bit of flair. He likes to be watched. He's one of those guys where if people are watching, he's going to perform a little better. And I think when you get to the playoffs in that scenario, Ryan's going to perform better. Speaking on Harrell, a guy that came over from the Dodgers org, and you immediately see just the assimilation with this team. I mean, he fits right in when he joins the team in mid. It was like mid-August, maybe early August or time frame or so. He finally got into some games with us, but he worked right in so perfectly. And a guy that immediately was seen as a valuable asset to the team, a guy with a very smooth swing. I was very impressed watching him in batting practice and seeing him at the plate during these scenarios. A guy that just has a smooth swing at the plate. I mean, he works on that. Obviously, has a very good knack for playing second base. I like him a little more at second than I do at short, but I think it's just because I like Ryan Burroughs so much at short. Just having seen that 1-2 combo, that's kind of what Pat was doing in the playoffs. Just I like him a little more at short, at second, I should say. But no, that being said, those two guys immediately were huge additions to the team, and they played a valuable role all year.
Yeah, that's great. You kind of hinted at it a little bit with Ryan Burroughs there as one of the guys that kind of would fit this criteria. But who are some guys from this roster that you may not have seen, whether you saw a lot of them or a little of them this year, that you think there's kind of more in the tank for next year? Because this is something Jeff and I have been considering as we head into the offseason. Like, who are the guys we really think have a lot more to show than the average fan would see based on the stats and based on the numbers this year? Because obviously, in the minor leagues, there's a lot more than numbers, right? Like, there's a lot of development going on. There's so many things guys are tweaking, whether it was Burroughs with his hands and a lot of these other guys who are adjusting pitch shapes from the pitching side of things, right? Like, the guys that now kind of we're looking towards 2025 is like, let's see what they got next year.
Yeah, I think the number one guy that kind of steps up and fits in that mold for me, just seeing what he could do late in the year, and he didn't get much in the way of opportunity late in the year, especially in the playoffs. But Nathan Archer is a guy that I saw a lot of later in the year that I liked what I saw from him. And I don't think that he was – I think that seeing what he was able to do later in the year, it's kind of giving me that Ryan Galaney vibe where it's like, okay, Ryan was figuring some things out. He was still trying to find his footing in the lineup. And I think that's kind of the same way for Nathan. When Nathan came in and he's a fast player, just a guy that goes out and he's got the speed. He's got the knack to move first to third at the blink of an eye. I mean, he's got that ability. It just couldn't find his way at the plate, couldn't find a comfortable approach, I'd say. He just always seemed to be kind of caught off guard every now and then. Mm-hmm. That being said, I think Nathan and his Archer is a guy that is going to be worth a watch next year for sure. I would envision he would be with us at the start of next year. I think he's got the talent to go way further than us, but I would envision he'd be back next year. Another guy that I'll say that when I say may, he probably won't be back with us next year, but Ronnie Hernandez, I still think there's so much more in the tank with him. Watching him all season and watching what he can do at the plate, the guy's just an absolute talent. He's got a knack for getting on base, and he's got a knack for putting the ball in play. Had more walks than strikeouts. He was one of only 3 teenagers in single A to have more walks than strikeouts, and the other 2 were top 30 prospects in baseball by the time the season was over. Jason Chorio with Cleveland, and then Kevin McGonigal up in Detroit. 2 very solid prospects. And Ronnie Hernandez is that third guy, and he's not sniffing the White Sox top 30. So I think that's a guy that next year you'll see a lot from him if he can continue to get developed in the offseason and everything and stay in shape and stay ready to go. The one area of his game that is going to need to take a step up next year is his power. 1 home run last year, but a guy that puts the ball in play, has no problem doing that, drives in the runs, but he's got the ability and he's got some of that space, I'd say, to allocate some power into his bat.
Yeah, he has a lot more in the tank. I love Roney. We both are big friends of Roney. I think, like you said, he's got the ability to get that power going, and it's just a matter of finding the adjustments in his swing to make it happen, because he's got the raw power for sure. He just has to find a way to tap into it consistently. But I agree with a lot of those names. That was a great list there for sure.
I know we got to wrap up soon, guys, but I've got one last question for you, Dan. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Pat Leyland. Just a terrific guy. I loved working with him. I have a feeling you did, and I know the players did.
Man, it's such a blessing. It's such a blessing to not just get to work with Pat and knowing that his dad pops by and all that. Like it's so awesome to me. Like I pinch myself sometimes. It's like being at the playoff games and after the game, Jim Leland's coming to me and it's like, oh my gosh, like pinch me for a second here. Like it's just so awesome. But Pat is such a amazing human being. Like I don't even have to talk about how he is as a manager. I mean, I will, but human being number one, fantastic guy. Definitely someone that I would run through a brick wall for, and I think that's kind of how he manages. That's how he leads his team. And there's not a guy in that room that wouldn't run through a brick wall for him. But it's an effective leadership strategy in that he's not a guy that's going to yell at you. He's not a guy that's going to, get emotional too much. He's not. He's a guy that keeps his emotions in check, and you just kind of see that throughout the year from Pat, and it's fun to watch for sure. A guy that is going to go places in baseball in this game that we love. It honestly, sitting here, it's like, man, he's probably not going to be back with us next year here in Kannapolis. And I don't know. I haven't been given the assignments for coaching staffs next year, but I would envision that if he's with us again next year, that it's probably going to be his last hurrah here before he moves up the system. But a guy that's going to go places in the game, players first manager that just gets it. Like he gets it, and he's one of those guys you feel like you can talk to him about anything, and he's always going to be there. Just a standout human being, and definitely got a very bright future in this game.
Yeah, I think we couldn't agree with you more there. I think he's definitely going to be moving up in the coaching world in the near future for sure. Well, Dan, we really appreciate you taking the time as always, man. We love talking baseball with you, and especially Kannapolis baseball, and we're excited for next season, and we're looking forward to hopefully having you back on in the future, getting out to some more. I know Jeff will be at more Kanny games next year, and I hope I'll get to make a trip there again next year as well.
Yeah, definitely, and we'll be back with each other real soon. April is coming. It's still I guess some things to take care of in the off season, but we'll get through those, and then we'll get to April, and man, we get to open up against a new team. We get the Hickory Crawdads coming to town. Texas's High A moves down to Single A, so we'll renew that rivalry, and
cool.
hope to see y'all come out and come to a game, and hope to hear some of our listeners here come out to a game for sure, and I'd love to have them.
Awesome. We really appreciate you.
Appreciate the time, Dan. Look forward to seeing you in the spring, and have a great off season, my friend.
Thank you, Dan. Have a good one.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.